This is the Big O Show. This is the Big O Show.
Good morning, everybody. Clay Ferraro here, Ira Winderman there. And Ira, this feels a little different than a typical post-victory Wednesday morning. It's almost like people are kind of looking for some of the dings in the armor from what we saw last night with this Heat team. So we're going to get to a lot of that and see if some of the concerns that we may have had over these last couple of weeks are starting to become bigger issues as we start to look ahead to the playoffs. But let's start here, Ira. What was your big takeaway from this game last night, a game that the Heat were able to win against a Pistons team that near the bottom of the league, despite the fact they've been playing better basketball lately? What was your overwhelming takeaway from this?
I'm concerned about the Heat scoring, and I guess I'm doing it on dual fronts. I'm concerned about that it takes Tyler Hero to go off in every second quarter for them to regain their footing, and that it takes someone like a Max Strus to come out of nowhere with the first 13 points of the fourth quarter to keep them competitive. And the reason I say that, Clay, is not as much just the Heat game, but also like Big O spoke about on the crosstalk here leading into, Slomin's home shield inside the paint show. And the reason is I'm concerned because if you're going to play someone like the Nets in the first round, you're going to have to score. You're going to have to outscore another team. And I just don't know if Kyle Lowry is going to be Mr. 4 points and Bam Adebayo is going to be consistent and Duncan Robinson is going to be up and down. There are going to be some of these playoff series, you're seriously going to have to manufacture points at a high rate, which means a healthy and contributing Jimmy Butler, which means Kyle Lowry not being passive and waiting the entire first half to make his first shot. So I think there are concerns. Look, if that wasn't the Pistons last night, Clay, or if that was the Pistons with Cade Cunningham, arguably the rookie of the year in the NBA this season, you probably would be talking about an L and a completely different outlook this morning. Now, you gained a half game. You're still in first place. You still have that number 1 seed. But even Eric Spoelstra said when he experimented with the Markieff Morris, PJ Tucker front line, when he had to go in different directions, they're still tinkering. They're about a month away from the start of the playoffs. The playoffs start April 16th. And all of a sudden, I think that the thoughts of perfection aren't there. And here's the real question, Clay Ferraro. Are the Miami Heat a team that is more built for the regular season than they are for the playoffs? And that's where my mindset is right now. I mean, you're not rolling in Gabe Vincent. You're not rolling in Max Strus. You're not going 11 deep in the playoffs. Either your best get it done, your best be their best, or you're not advancing. So are the Heat locked into a definitive championship contending 8-man core, or is this a team that has a bunch of really nice guys? And in late April and early May, while others are playing on, are we going to say, but they had a bunch of really nice guys? So again, are the nice guys good enough? Or do the Heat have that core elite that championship teams ultimately will need?
Guys, make sure to hit that like button for us. It does us a huge favor. Also, drop your questions in the chat. We want to make this interactive and see if you can give Ira and me something that we can disagree on and go heavy on. But no, I think that it all comes down to Jimmy Butler in many ways for me, Ira. And maybe I'm putting too much on his shoulders, but I saw what he did during this team's NBA Finals run. And I think that's why I'm a bit more concerned based on what I've seen so far this year. And you've been on the side of this whole season that once it gets to the playoffs and once you get to those real moments of truth and the regular season doesn't really seem to matter as much, that's when we'll see the real Jimmy Butler. But these injuries keep popping up. I understood last week when you looked at a game against Phoenix and a game against Minnesota, 2 games against Western Conference teams, and you made a great point that ultimately that Eastern Conference tiebreaker could be vital for this team. But last night was concerning. You're taking on an Eastern Conference team. Jimmy Butler gets hurt. You can look at this 2 ways, right? Like either you're so thankful that you've got somebody like Max Strus who can pull you out of the fire in the fourth quarter. But I think, to your point, it's more of a concern to me that you needed that to happen against a Pistons team without Cade Cunningham. Now, I will say again, they had just played the Clippers really tough. They had played some tough games. They beat the Raptors. I mean, the last few games for Detroit, they've looked like a different and ascending team.
They also entered 1-13 without Cade Cunningham this year. So they're a different team without their best player.
And so it's not like you can tell me, hey, this is a better Pistons team than their record would indicate. But are they? And I think, again, and it's again, if you're going to tell me that the Western Conference games don't mean as much and the Eastern Conference games are more important, and that's what we're all in on, what were we seeing last night? So these are my concerns moving forward, Ira. Can Jimmy Butler be that guy who is going to take you to the next level in the playoffs? Because he's going to be the difference, man. And if he is going to be able to take his game to another level, I'm not as concerned. But I'm getting to the point where I'm going to need to see it, and I'm going to need to see him healthy in order to feel better about this term's long-term prognosis than I am right now.
You know what? This comes down to one thing we always hear in sports, Clay, that we don't know if it really exists or not, okay? And that is the switch. Is there really such thing as flipping the switch, turning the switch? Over the years, and I know this for a fact when it came to Shaquille O'Neal and LeBron James, we'd be talking about playoff seeds, and they'd be going, doesn't matter where we finish. I finished first and second and third. I won a championship from fourth. I've been able to do it. When the playoffs start, we can flip that switch. And then I've seen teams that said the same thing last season's Heat. It doesn't matter that we're not as good as we were in the bubble. We're built for the playoffs. When we face those Bucks in the first round, we took care of them last year. We'll take care of them again in 5 games. They didn't. And so it comes down to, Kyle Lowry told us this. I believe it was, might have been after Friday or Saturday's game at FTX Arena, where he said, I've been swept out while being a number 1 seed. I've been swept while being a number 2 seed. He won the championship as a number 2 seed in 2019 in Toronto. Does this switch exist? That's one of those sort of sports debates where players will say that. It's easy to say that because it buys you time. Because if you say you're going to flip the switch, it makes the rest of the regular season moot. It downplays the, oh my God, the Heat aren't in first place anymore. They just lost games to Chicago and Boston and Toronto on that upcoming road trip, or even Monday coming up on Philadelphia. I don't have confidence this is a flip the switch team, because I think this is a team that relies so much on cohesion. This team does not have the kind of scoring, if you go look at your Heat stats, where on other teams, whether it's the Giannis or someone else, someone's averaging 27 points and the next highest scorer is 19 or so. So it's that guy. We're going to ride KD. We're going to ride Embiid. We're going to ride Harden. We're going to ride Giannis. We're going to ride DeRozan. In other words, the Heat doesn't have that guy. The Heat, it's been Tyler lately, which has been a little problematic as a 6th man, but that's the difference. So it's not just, can one guy flip the switch? Can all 8 guys in the rotation flip the switch and be better than they are right now? The Heat went into last night's game 4-3 in their previous 7 games. Good, but not good enough. That gets you beat, if not in the first round, in the second round. So I think there has to be a little bit more. We know that Tyler Hero is an SOB. He will go out and get you buckets when you need. But we've also seen his defense, Clay. And we're still not as sold that in the ultimate moments of truth, can you trust Tyler Hero both ways? Or for everything he does at a Tyler Hero level, which is very good, but still growing. It's not a DeRozan level. It's not a Harden level. It's not a Kyrie level. It's not a Durant level. So what he gets, will you wind up giving up more on the other end? Really interesting. Eric Spoelstra said, this is a week we've had practice. We haven't practiced all year. They practice on Monday. They're going to practice again on Thursday. They might practice on Sunday. They need to build that a little more. And to your point, Clay Ferraro, if Jimmy Butler is on the bad ankle and is not going to play and is not going to be in those practices, tick, tick, tick. The clock ticks. We get closer to the playoffs with no definitive sense of who they are or what they are. You're right. This is very weird. They're in first place. They're having a hell of a season. They're 21 or 22 over 500. And yet we could wake up in the morning here on the Slomins Home Security Inside the Paint show and still have questions at a 9 a.m. on a Wednesday. Interesting times.
Yeah, and yet I think they're valid. And, you know, I think, unfortunately, the thing that we've talked about, it's not just on this show, but I think the concerns people had about when you give Jimmy Butler a max contract again at this age, it's okay, at what point does the breakdown start? And once it starts, it doesn't go the other way. Now, you could easily say, all right, the ankle last night, that was a fluke. If it had just been that one, then you write it off and say, okay, he misses a game or two. He waits for the ankle to heal. He comes back. Not a big issue, despite the fact it's this late in the season. Hopefully you've got that continuity already built up. But the bottom line is that continuity was not built up. He's had the toe issue, which seems like more of a lingering thing, and one of those things that you're like, okay, is this kind of the part of the breakdown? And then also the sinus issue. And he's missed these. I am all for stealing rest down the stretch for your guys so that they're fresh for the playoffs, especially against Western Conference teams. The problem is when that takes away from the continuity that you're trying to build. And I was not that concerned about that with this team earlier in the year because I thought the first few games, man, they went out there and they hit it like they had been playing together for 8 years. But that's kind of slipped. And it's almost like these guys shuffling in and out of a lineup, some of that continuity that they had built up during those Hunger Games practices during training camp, it seems to have waned. It seems to be, and nobody's quite sure, okay, is it my turn to step up? Is it his turn to step? So I think it's good that they're getting this practice time. But to your point, if you can't build the continuity with your best player on the floor, then what good does it really do? All you're basically doing is getting more minutes for guys who've already gotten those minutes. And hey, it does give you a Max Strus to do what he did last night. But is he the guy that you're going to rely on to pull you out of the fire in the fourth quarter against the Brooklyn Nets in the playoffs?
1,000 points correct on that. And that's why Eric Spoelstra, I'm just listening to his tape again this morning. I get up, I transcribe it, and sort of come up with a new story for the next day. And before we came on the air here, and he was saying that's what made our team so special this year, is that we've had plug-and-play guys who might not play the first half. Last night, Gabe Vincent and Max Strus, and they can come on. That doesn't matter in the playoffs. Remember those finals against the Lakers when all of a sudden the Heat rolled through Indiana and Milwaukee and Boston, and they were right there toe-to-toe early in the series with the Lakers, and then Bam went down and was lost, and then Goran went down and was lost. Your Myers Leonard's giving you an erstwhile effort starting in place of Bam Adebayo doesn't get it done in the playoffs. It's your core four, your core five that ultimately make the ultimate difference, that play much bigger minutes in the playoffs than the regular season because there are no back-to-backs. So I just hope the epitaph to this Heat season isn't this, when we walk back in, the locker rooms are back open after COVID, that says we fought the good fight during the regular season. Next man up. There's a bunch of regular season stuff. Clay Ferraro, no one remembers the regular season. No one's going to remember this great Panther season, Florida Panther season.
Yep.
If they go up against my Rangers in the first round and they lose in the first round, people are going to forget that. No one's going to remember any of that. Remember all those years when the Marlins had those great starts and we're like, ooh, finally this is going to happen. Then they turn back into the Marlins. That's what the NBA regular season is. On one hand, we say it has value because it gives us enjoyment and pleasure 2 or 3, 4 times a night during the dog days. But it still all comes down to the playoffs. This Heat team, matter of fact, we can talk about this on a later segment of the show today also. If you were to ask me what defines a successful Miami Heat season, it's not a 50-win season. It's not a number 1 seed. It's how far did you get in the playoffs? And if the Heat meet all the milestones of the regular season, they have Bam as Defensive Player of the Year. They have Tyler as Sixth Man Award winner. They win their 50 games. They finish number 1 in the conference. But if they go out in the first round of the playoffs, Clay, it might as well again be 2021 and the Bucks, because all of a sudden, for everything they did, and I hope this doesn't happen, you and I could be on here every Wednesday talking about what did the Heat have to change? Did they rely on too many old players? Did they not feature Tyler Moore as a starter? Did they ride too long with Duncan Robinson? So it's all building. Eric Spoelstra knows that. 6 months of what happens until April 16th don't matter nearly as much as what happens starting on April 16th. We still don't know. We think we know. We hope we know.
Ira, am I wrong to be concerned about Jimmy Butler and what we've seen from him, not just the injuries, but also the play down the stretch? Am I making too much of this thing?
Here's what's happening to Jimmy Butler. And Clay, you remember this from last year. You reach a certain age in the NBA when you realize what I just said, that the regular season only counts so much. Remember Jimmy's vow on the eve of the Bucks series? You're going to see the best me. You know, this is my time. This is go time. I'm ready. And then he was humbled game after game after game after game. The veteran who thinks he can just turn it on at the start of the playoffs. The veteran who tries to save himself for the start of the playoffs. The veteran who, look, you can talk about sinus congestion or whatever, but that ostensibly was rest. I think the toe, for the most part, was the kind of thing you and I always talk about. Could you have played in a playoff game with that? The answer is hell yeah. And to his credit, Jimmy pushed through the rest of the first half, and he clearly was limping.
Yes.
And like I tweeted during the game, it's once he goes in the locker room. And once that thing starts swelling up, and once they have to start icing it, he's done. And that was the prudent thing and the right approach to take also. I hate that flip the switch. We're going to flip the switch for the playoffs. We're going to get it going. Now, maybe Jimmy can do that. He did it in 2020. Maybe Kyle can do that. They did that in 2019 when the Raptors won the championship. I won't know until I know. It looks like PJ Tucker's almost saying that right now, as his play has sort of waned a little bit recently. But man, that's a dangerous game. You play the Nets in the first round. You play them at FTX Arena. You got Mike Breen and the national crew down here on a Sunday for ABC and ESPN, and they lose that game. Oh my God. Oh my God, not just the feeling in the arena. Oh my God, Clay Ferraro sitting next to Will Manso on that Sunday sports show talking about what went right or what went wrong when it comes to where the Heat stand in the playoffs. So that's the whole point of this morning. It's sort of not a wake-up call, although at 9 a.m., I guess it's a wake-up call for anybody. But Clay, more than anything, I think it's a case of we know so much about the Miami Heat to this point, but I'm not so sure we know exactly who they are or what they're going to be. That when you look at the Miami Heat, when you wake up today and you say, hey, still first place, still in a position of strength, still with Tyler Hero emerging, able to go through a fourth quarter with Max Strus and do what they did last night, that's a lot of check marks in all the good boxes. But when you also look at where they stand and look at the possible playoff teams, you can see scenarios where you play different opponents in the playoffs. Let's say it's the Nets in the first round. Can you outscore Brooklyn in the first round? Well, they've been a little shaky. There's been a lot of small numbers in those quarter-by-quarter scores. We've seen the 18s. We've seen the 19. We've seen the 9-point quarters. They were outscored 19-0 in the third quarter of that game last night. So you have all of that going on as well. So you say to yourself, in different matchups, do they have the answers? They have not looked great against the Boston Celtics. They have one game left at the start of a 3-game trip against Boston. You'd like to see him make it right, but it's also 2 weeks before the end of the season. Does Eric Spoelstra roll out his best lineup, or does that just create more doubts if you finish the season series 0-3 against the Celtics? Then you go on in that trip, you play a Chicago Bulls team, you're 3-0, but you're 3-0 against them at the start of the season. So it becomes a question of, if you lose that one, is there seeded doubts? Then you go to Toronto, second nights of a back-to-back. Do you even wind up having Kyle Lowry play in a game like that, even though it's his only chance to play in front of a full crowd when they go to Toronto? So that's why, we're sitting here this morning, and you're in such a good position, and you still have questions. Now, Eric Spoelstra is the kind of coach who's going to tell you, it's good to have questions. I want my guys on edge. I want them to know that nothing is a given, that you still could be sitting in first place, 2.5 games ahead of the Milwaukee Bucks, ahead of the Philadelphia 76ers, who've been rebuilt with what Joel Embiid and James Harden give you, and you still have those kind of questions. So I think when you look at all of that, Clay, and thank you for letting me have my little soliloquy here, I think you can say to yourself, you know what? We still need answers. And Clay, as long as this team still needs answers and still has questions, one thing that I didn't think was going to happen is going to happen, Clay. The final 3 weeks of the regular season will have meaning for the Miami Heat. There will be meaningful games for seeding. There will be meaningful games for statements, like I just said, against the Celtics, against the Bulls, against the Raptors, even the final week of home games. You're playing Charlotte and Atlanta. Those teams are desperate to make the play-in, or maybe get to the number 8 seed and host a play-in game in one of those first 2 rounds there. So there's a lot of meaning still left for the Heat. There's still a lot of unanswered questions, and maybe that's good. Because, Clay, would you rather have a team going into the playoffs that's in a malaise, or would you rather have a team that's on edge? We have our answer. They're going to have to be on edge. How do they handle that? And how they handle that might impact how they handle the playoffs.
So we're going to talk about that more. I do want to talk about the Duncan Robinson, Max Strus conundrum, and I want to talk about who else may need to earn some more minutes down the stretch here, especially if Jimmy Butler can't play for any period of time. That and a lot more coming up right here on Inside the Paint.
This is the Big O Show. This is the Big O Show.